In 2016, many were stunned when Donald Trump won the presidency in the US, immediately casting doubt on the validity of polls that clearly showed Hillary Clinton winning. 4 years later, there is a healthy skepticism surrounding polls, but there was one poll that forecast a Trump win in 2016, as well as the outcome of Brexit and the results of the last Canadian election, to name but a few of its accurate predictions. Advanced Symbolics Inc. is a company that uses artificial intelligence to augment market research and prediction. ASI's patented AI, named Polly, is predicting a Biden victory. Erin Kelly is president and CEO and joins me now. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Hi, Candace.
So, most polls call people up and ask them a series of questions, and then that data is then compiled. How does Polly differ?
Well, Polly, the big way that she differs is in the size of the sample that she's looking at. So your typical pollster will have, say, 1,500 people in their sample. Polly has 300,000, and she's looking at them all longitudinally. So it's important to understand that her method for picking people to study is the same as the method that another pollster would use. So it's a randomized controlled sample, meaning people don't volunteer to be in our sample. In our case, we don't ask any questions. We're listening to people in social media, but it's important to understand that while people will say not everybody's on social media, etc., exactly, that's why we sample and we make sure we have a balanced sample of people from different age groups, ethnicities, socioeconomic factors, so it looks just like the census. And we monitor these people over the long term. We can go back and see what their politics have been all year, how things change with different news items. So that's really the key, is that it's a large sample of people. It's representative. It's not everybody on social media. It's a representative sample. And we're looking to see how their opinion changes with different events.
So when you say social media, are you talking all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Snapchat, or just a couple of select ones?
Well, Polly can look at all in this particular election. So because it's important to understand, because we're sampling, it doesn't actually matter which platform we're using. So we will use different platforms for different things. So Polly doesn't just do politics. She does a lot of work in healthcare, etc. So depending on if we're doing marketing, or if we're doing tourism, we might want to use Facebook, or Pinterest for travel and different things. In this particular case, for this election, we're using Twitter. We can use, because we find that's really good for a political signal, but we can use Reddit, Facebook, any social platform.
Okay, so let's talk about 2016 for a second then. Was there a moment where you saw a clear shift to Trump, or was this something you were sort of as a gradual shift to him? Because I think a lot of people would like to point to the October surprise of Comey, for example, and say that's what changed it. Was that, or was there more of a gradual move?
Well, that didn't help, but no, it was more of a gradual move. So we saw as early as August 2016, people starting to move toward Trump. And there were a few things that stood out. Number one, you might remember, so there was a controversy back in 2016 with some corruption in politics, and we saw a lot of people, some of the older people, move out of the Republican Party, older people, into the Democrat Party. They were making announcements, taking up press releases saying, we're moving over to Hillary Clinton's camp. And these were some of the people involved in the banking scandal and stuff like that. And Hillary Clinton embraced them. And Donald Trump said, I don't want those people in my party. They're corrupt. Okay, and that's when he started the whole corrupt Hillary thing. And that really hurt her. And not only that, but these people who over 65 who said they were moving over to the Democrats actually moved back to the Republicans before the election happened. So she didn't actually get that seniors vote. The other thing we saw is Trump's message in Michigan, his stump speech, where he said, what do you have to lose by voting Trump, when he was addressing a Black audience. And he said, Hillary's going to be the same old, and your schools aren't good, and your children aren't getting employed. What have you got to lose? And that really resonated with people, and we started to see a change. The difference is that when people would take part in phone polls, they didn't admit that they were feeling that change, because to admit to a person that you were going to vote for Donald Trump seemed to be admitting that you're a racist or homophobic or sexist or what have you. So people didn't publicly admit it, but we saw online that they started paying attention to his speeches more, because we can follow, the other thing Polly can do is follow what's called your digiographic profile. So she sees what you choose to read. Again, we're not collecting names, no privacy issues. It's just high level trends. But what people are, when people are starting to spend more time reading material devoted to Donald Trump, for instance, than Hillary Clinton, then that gives us some hints about how their vote is changing.
Okay, so we're less than a couple of weeks out from the election. So you are predicting a Biden win. Is there any way you think Trump could pull this off and be president?
Yes, there's a 10% chance of that. So if you go to our website, advancedsymbolics.com, you'll be able to actually see the map updated every day. So important to watch it every day because anything can change between now and November 3rd. For instance, when the president got COVID and subsequently seemed to recover from COVID, he went up by 20 electoral district votes in that space. So, that was a significant jump. Now he came back down when people started to think he wasn't taking it seriously, et cetera, but he did get a bump from that. So if, for example, there's a better treatment that comes out that he makes available to people, or if Joe Biden has a moment, he's called, people call him Sleepy Joe, and there's a meme out there that he's not as sharp mentally as he used to be. If he seems to show that in the debate on Thursday, for example, this could bolster Trump and bring down Biden. We still have a margin of error of the 86 votes. So it is possible that Mr. Trump could win, but we don't think it's probable. There's a 90% chance of Biden at this point.
Okay, so let's turn our focus to Canada for a second, because, I was just reading that there is, seemingly the election drums are beating here. Are you gauging the appetite for that among Canadians?
We're not specifically looking at that. We are looking at the popularity of politicians in the COVID era. And we've seen, so in March, April, despite what the media were saying, people were actually quite resilient back in the spring. And we gave many interviews saying that yes, there were vulnerable populations, but those were the populations that were already vulnerable and they were seeing heightened stress. But people, by and large, were really happy with the way the prime minister was handling things and the way the premiers were handling things. We've now seen a divergence, especially for the premiers of the provinces, because often they're the ones delivering the bad news, right? They're the ones saying, we're going to shut down, et cetera. Whereas the federal government is more the coming out with the care packages and the money. So we are seeing that provincial premiers, as well as the health bodies, the heads of provincial public health, are really taking a hit in terms of public sentiment versus, so now would not be a good time, for example, for many of the premiers to hold an election.
Okay, and aside from elections, you also are listening to other things and you're tracking other things like COVID-19. So what are you seeing with that?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not allowed to talk about. So just to back up, we have won a contract to do forecasting of COVID cases in Ontario, and we are at the point where we have reproduced those cases. We're not at liberty right now to talk about what we have found, but some of the things that we're looking at, aside from forecasting when the next outbreak will happen, is how do the outbreaks happen? So some of the questions as researchers we're looking at, does every person who has COVID spread COVID, or is it really just 10% of the population that spreads COVID? Because there's two ways you can look at it: the R naught, which is each person infects 2 or 3 people, or a K dispersion, which is one person actually disperses the virus to, say, tens of or dozens of people. So we're looking at that to see how it spreads. And some of the clues to that, you can see on the Ontario government, it shows you when somebody gets COVID at a school, you often see one case in a school and it doesn't break out. Why is that? Versus in long-term care homes, when you get one case, you often get then dozens, right? So there's different ways that this virus spreads, and you have to learn those things so that you can better ascertain where the next outbreak will happen, where you need people to get tested, and what kind of testing do we need. For example, the nasal tests, which are very precise but take a long time, relatively speaking, to process, versus the cheaper ones that are less sensitive, but if more people are taking them in a K dispersion, that would be a better test.
Okay, I wish we had more time to talk about this. This is absolutely fascinating technology. So if people want to know more and learn more, where can they find more about Poly and more about your company?
Well, we have our website, advancedsymbolics.com. We're going to be putting out a show called Ask Polly soon, where people can come in and ask Polly kind of questions like this that they might have that we can answer about human behavior. And we have a blog on there, so people are free. We invite comments if people want to see us write about particular issues that are of interest to them that they can ask Polly. We'd really love to have that feedback.
Incredible. Thank you so much for joining me today, Erin. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Candice.